14th century, Philip VI, King of France, saw a great new rival emerge. The Plantagenet King of England, Edward III. He intended to seize the crown from his Valois cousin.
Forward! Charge!
The rivalry between the two monarchs and their lust for power was to break the bond between France and England for generations. It started the longest and bloodiest war in European history. This became known as the 100 Years' War. On February the 1st, 1328, the 34-year-old Capetian King of France, Charles IV, lay dying. Charles had failed to produce a son and heir, so on his death, the throne of France would be up for grabs. Power-hungry rivals started to circle.
My king.
The Capetian dynasty's only hope lay in the belly of the French king's third wife, Jeanne d'Evreux. She was 7 months pregnant. Charles prayed that Jeanne would give him a son. But until then, he entrusted his first cousin Philip de Valois as regent. Philip was 35 years old, a tall and handsome knight, with a reputation for courage both in tournament and on the battlefield. If the queen gave birth to a son, that child would become king. But if it was a girl, then Philip would become the first Valois king of France. In the spring of 1328, the queen went into labor. The whole court held their breath.
Breathe.
At 10 a.m. on April 1st, the much-awaited baby was born. It was a girl. They christened her Blanche. Philip de Valois was immediately summoned to Paris and officially proclaimed Philip VI, King of France.
Stand up, my lords.
Philip now reigned over 16 million subjects and the largest kingdom in Europe. It was the end of the Capetian dynasty and the start of the Valois.
To you, my people, I promise 3 things. To keep the peace, to stop all pillaging, and to judge fairly.
While Philip VI was enjoying his moment of glory, in England, events were unfolding that would have a dramatic effect on the new King of France. For 3 years, Isabel, the Queen of England, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, Earl of March, had ruled England. Isabel had overthrown her husband Edward II and crowned her son Edward III king. But Mortimer was really in charge. That changed one dark night in October 1330.
Who are you? What do you want?
Edward hated his mother's lover. He was a cruel and vengeful usurper. He had ordered the murder of Edward's father and was also responsible for the death of his brother. Edward wanted revenge.
Take him.
No. No.
Isabel was an accomplice to all her lover's crimes, but Edward showed her mercy and let her live. Mortimer wasn't so fortunate. On November 30th, 1330, he was executed in the most humiliating way. Not beheaded, as was usual for a nobility, but hanged like a commoner. Edward III was now the undisputed sovereign of England, but he wanted more. The 18-year-old king had his sights set on the crown of France as well. Edward's ambition was founded on the fact that his mother Isabel was a member of the French royal family. She was the sister of the late Capetian king Charles IV. Like him, she was a descendant of the illustrious King St. Louis IX. So Philip VI, the Valois King of France, was her first cousin. But Philip was a member of a younger branch of the Capetian dynasty. Isabel was a direct descendant. When Isabel's brother died in 1328, she sent 2 English diplomats to Paris to demand that the French crown be handed over to her. But the assembly refused. It had long been believed that Isabel wasn't allowed to inherit the French crown because of the Salic law. This law barred inheritance by women in favor of a firstborn male. But no one knew of the law's existence at the time, and it wasn't invoked until much later. The decision to proclaim Philip de Valois king was probably based on politics. Philip was a member of the royal court, and everyone knew him. Isabel was a foreigner, and she was hated in court. Edward thought this was an injustice, and he was determined to put it right, especially as the many territories he already held in France were no longer sufficient. Since the 12th century, English kings had held many valuable territories in the very heart of France, the county of Ponthieu in the north, and the duchy of Aquitaine in the southwest. But the kings of England governed these territories merely as dukes and not as monarchs. So when it came to swearing loyalty to Philip, the new king of France, Edward refused. He would recognize him as a lord, but not as his sovereign. Philip was incensed by Edward's disrespect. As payback, in 1337 he decided to seize Aquitaine. Philip VI was a great military leader.
Enter.
He led one of the strongest and most aggressive armies on the continent.
We have enough men to surround them. I want them posted here and here.
On the other side, England was a depopulated island with a disastrous military reputation.
The English are weak. Victory is ours. Give the order.
Yes, sire.
For years, the English had been fighting a furious border war with the Scots.
Welcome, my son.
Philip VI chose to support Scotland and its 14-year-old King David II.
Let's talk about the future.
When Edward III heard that Philip VI had offered protection to the King of Scotland and planned to take Aquitaine, he was furious.
Traitor!
This was treachery. Edward sent a letter to the King of France. It was delivered by the Bishop of Lincoln wearing full canonical dress. Faced with such a ceremony, the King of France, who didn't lack a sense of humor, laughed out loud. But when Philip read the letter, the laughter soon stopped. Edward had the audacity to write, "Lord Philip de Valois, who claims to be King of France." Edward was challenging Philip's right to rule.
Tell that to your king from me. I, Philip de Valois, am the only king of France.
Edward declared himself the legitimate heir to the French throne. This was nothing short of a declaration of war. In April 1339, the King of France sent an army to attack the English stronghold of Aquitaine. They seized several towns, such as Saint-Macaire and Blaye. But Bordeaux stood firm. Edward III was at war with the Scots when he found out Philip's offensive in Aquitaine. He swore to retaliate, but the English treasury were empty. He searched for an ally to finance the war. Cities in Flanders answered his call. In January 1340, in Gaunt, Belgium, Edward unfurled his new coat of arms to his baron. The traditional English lions were now quartered with gold fleur-de-lis on a blue background, the symbol of the French royal family. With this act, Edward was proclaiming himself both King of England and France. Edward's actions were met with an immediate and ferocious response from King Philip. In the former royal abbey of Saint-Denis, Philip summoned his knights together and raised the sacred oriflamme, the standard of the King of France. The message was clear. It was a symbol of French military power and pride, and made it clear that the fight for France would be a fight to the death. War was now on, but it would take 5 years to prepare. July 12, 1346, 750 English ships made landfall at Saint-Vaast-la-Hougue in Normandy. The ships transported 15,000 men ready for battle. But before attacking, Edward knighted his 16-year-old son, Prince of Wales. He would later become known as the Black Prince because of the color of his armor. Edward's army then plundered their way through Normandy in an orgy of violence. They left a trail of devastation in their wake. Edward's intention was to show that Philip VI was not capable of protecting his own kingdom. On July 26, 1346, Edward and his men attacked the city of Caen. Over 3 days, 5,000 men, women, and children were massacred. The English stole jewels, clothes, vessels of gold and silver. The English pursued their lust for blood towards the capital, Paris. Two weeks after the English invasion, Philip gathered a vast army at Saint-Denis. Faced with this threat, Edward turned and ran. He headed north for the coastal city of Calais. Despite having the French army at his heels, on August 26th, the weary English stopped here, nearer to the village of Crécy-en-Ponthieu in the north of France. Philip and some of his army arrived at Crécy during the night. He immediately sent scouts to judge the strength of the English army. The next morning, they reported that the English appeared to have no more than 11,000 men in total.
11,000. Thank you, my lords. Victory is certain. They are 11,000. We are 3 times as many.
Careful, sire. The English are very well organized.
One of Philip's counselors, Henri Lemoine de Bâle, was less confident than his sovereign. He believed that the English had the better position. He advised Philip to wait until morning when the rest of his army had arrived in camp.
You are right.
But in the Middle Ages, controlling an army was a real challenge.
Halt! Reform the lines!
The men in the front received the king's order to stop.
Halt! Halt!
But the men at the back, who couldn't hear the order, continued to march, forcing the front forward until, inevitably, the front line came within range of the English. Philip had lost all hope of holding back his men. He ordered the attack.
Forward! Launch the assault!
The first battle of the 100 Years' War began. 6,000 Genoese crossbowmen, hired by Philip, led the attack. But their bolts fell short of the English line. The English archers advanced and fired. A good archer could shoot 20 arrows a minute, with a range of at least 180 meters. A crossbowman could only fire 5 bolts a minute, and their average range was less than 150 meters. In the second line, the king had the cream of French society, eager to fight.
Cavalry!
In the third line, the French foot soldiers who managed to survive the English arrows threw themselves into the fray, desperate to spill enemy blood. The battle continued until nightfall. The French army began to fall apart.
Aim! Fire!
Under a rain of arrows, the French soldiers dropped like flies. One of the few to break through the English lines was the blind King of Bohemia. He was so determined to fight, he tied himself to one of his men. Courageous or mad, John of Bohemia died on the field of Crécy. After 16 furious cavalry charges, the French retreated. They had been totally routed. King Philip, who was wounded in the throat by an English arrow, watched his troops run.
Sire, for God's sake, flee. All is lost.